was in the third year of a very bloody civil war. The proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious state are and henceforth shall be free. If you go on to read the wording in the National Archives online about the Emancipation Proclamation, it's very scientific and points out that all slaves weren't free everywhere. It was just the slaves in the rebellious states, and that a lot of the abolitionists were angry when it was first issued because they felt its scope was not broad enough. But as we sit here 150 years down the road, we can tell that no matter what its scope was at the time, it has painted a broad brush across our society. In 50 years hence, the proclamation was 1912. And James Weldon Johnson, the very person who wrote the song we sang this morning, also wrote a poem called 50 Years. And it's a long poem, and I'm not going to read all of it. But in some of the things he says, just 50 years of Women's Day as runs the history of a race. Yet we look back over the way, how distant seems our starting place. Look farther back 3 centuries to where a naked shivering score snatched from their haunts across the seas stood wild-eyed on Virginia's shore. This land is ours by right of birth. This land is ours by right of toil. We helped to turn this virgin earth, our sweat and its beautiful soil. And as I move on down to the end of the poem, it talks about, do you think that John Brown's spirit stops? What is the love joy that has been idly slain? Do you think of those precious drops from Lincoln's heart were shed in vain? That for which millions prayed and sighed, and for which tens of thousands fought, for so many have freely died. God cannot let it be, let it come to naught. Of course, I wasn't around in 1912. My dad was born the year after that. But in 1963, I was in the 2nd grade. And I remember, and I have thought, and I thought, and I thought, because I remember momentous occasions when I was in the 2nd grade. And the only thing that comes to mind is the assassination of President Kennedy. And as I have thought, and I have thought, I cannot remember any mention of the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1963. But I think we all can agree that we're here, can agree that 1963 was a troubled time. And the troubles weren't over either. As we know, all the way up to 1968 when we lost Martin Luther King. And we'll be talking more about his speech on another Sunday. But there was really no mention of the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. And it was a troubled time. People were in the middle of the civil rights movement, fighting for freedom. And then we have to take a step back and look 50 years later. I graduated from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville in 1974. Little did I realize the first black undergrad student crossed those doors in 1970. So literally, look at where we come from the 70s today. On the anniversary of the 150th signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, we had the second inauguration of the first African-American president. We've come a long way. And if I had to write a poem about today and the Emancipation Proclamation, it would be called Rejoice. Rejoice that we know that God is not dead, that he has carried us through these 150 years, always covering our heads, that he has given us grace through the time of trouble, A lot of freedom riders weren't black, they were white. And they gave up a lot. Family ties, everything, to follow the faith. So remember those that have gone before us. There are people who are sitting in our pews and people who have sat in the pews of Phillip's temple that were very active in the civil rights movement. And let us never forget their contribution and their faith to the cause. And most of all, let us praise God because He has brought us